Get out. People like you do not belong here. You are nothing but an animal." The sentence ripped through the airport terminal like broken glass scattered across marble. It was not whispered. It was not accidental. It was delivered with precision, a public declaration meant to wound. Heads turned instantly. The polished lounge, once filled with the quiet rustle of rolling suitcases and soft voices, fell into a stunned silence. At the center of it all stood a black woman in a white blazer, calm, poised, and still. The insult had been meant to cut her down. Instead, it revealed the ugliness of the one who had spoken it. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. She did not flinch. The leather strap of her black handbag rested against her arm. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, fixed on the flight attendant who had dared to raise a hand as if blocking a trespasser. The attendant's uniform was pressed, the scarf tied with care, but her words carried nothing of professionalism. "Wait outside," she repeated, louder now, as if authority could erase bias. "This lounge is for premium travelers, not for you." The woman in white did not move. She did not argue. She let silence answer first. That silence unsettled the onlookers more than shouting ever could. A man in a navy jacket shifted uneasily, whispering to the woman beside him, "Did you hear that?" A young passenger in denim, standing just behind the confrontation, slipped a phone from his pocket. Its lens rose, red light glowing, capturing the moment. The air thickened. Every second stretched long. The attendant's hand stayed lifted, a barrier as visible as the prejudice in her voice. "Step away," she warned again, her tone sharper, colder. "Or I will call security. We do not tolerate imposters here." The insult still hung heavy. The words animal and imposter refused to fade, echoing in ears that could not believe what they had heard in broad daylight, in a place meant for order and dignity. Yet through it all, the woman in white remained anchored. Her breath was even, her gaze unbroken. She was not rattled. She was not moved. She had been told before that she did not belong. She had been dismissed, disregarded, doubted. But she had also built, endured, and risen. What the attendant did not know was that in less than 2 minutes, the balance of this entire room would shift. The truth would no longer wait outside. It was already standing inside, silent, unshaken, and ready. The young man with the denim jacket did not lower his phone. The red recording light trembled slightly in his grip, but his voice steadied. "This is not right," he whispered, just loud enough for the woman beside him to hear. She nodded but kept her head down. The moment had already become bigger than one insult. It was now a spectacle, and the silence of the lounge was fractured by the weight of witnesses who did not know what to do. The flight attendant did not care. Her chin lifted higher as she gestured toward the entry doors. "Out," she said with exaggerated clarity. "You do not belong here. This lounge is for premium travelers, for people who earn their place. Not for strays." Her words landed like stones thrown in public. A businessman in a navy jacket shifted uncomfortably and muttered to himself, but he did not intervene. The black woman in the white blazer still had not spoken. Her calm unnerved those who expected anger. The leather strap of her bag pressed gently against her arm, and her stance remained unbroken, anchored as if the very floor belonged to her. Every insult piled against her like waves against a seawall, but she did not bend. That silence only provoked more. Another employee, this one a supervisor with a silver badge pinned to his chest, stepped forward. His voice carried less hesitation and more contempt. "People like you have tried this before. Fake passes, stolen identities. Step outside before I call security." His eyes narrowed as he spoke, his words chosen to sound official, but they dripped with something else. The young man filming looked around nervously. He caught the eye of an older woman seated near the glass partition. She whispered, "This is wrong." He swallowed hard and raised his phone higher. The recording was no longer just for himself. It was for everyone who would one day need proof. Still, the black woman did not speak. Her silence was louder than the voices around her. She was waiting, and though no one in that room knew it, she was waiting for more than words. She was waiting for the inevitable insult that would cross the final line, and it came. The supervisor, emboldened by her silence, reached across the counter. With a single tug, he ripped the boarding pass she had placed down. The paper tore clean in two, fluttering to the polished floor like confetti made of contempt. The sound was sharp, final, and unmistakable. Gasps rose from the lounge. Someone hissed, "She had a real ticket." Another voice muttered, "That is theft." Phones tilted, screens glowing red in every corner. The room was no longer private. It had become a stage. The supervisor smirked as he dropped the torn paper. "Fraud," he declared. "Security is coming." He pointed toward the guards moving at the edge of the terminal. His confidence filled the space like smoke. The woman in white bent slightly, her hand calm as she picked up the torn boarding pass. She brushed it once with her fingertips, then held it still. Her gaze lifted slowly, locking on the man who had just declared her an imposter. Her voice finally broke the silence. Low, measured, deliberate. "You will regret this." The words did not rise, they did not shout, but the air itself shifted. For the first time, it was not her who looked like the outsider, it was them. And the witnesses knew, even before she revealed the truth, that the balance of power had begun to change. The torn boarding pass still rested between her fingers, edges jagged like a wound carved in plain sight. She did not move quickly. She did not raise her hand. She simply stood there, holding what was left of her right to exist in that room. And the silence pressed heavier than before. The supervisor's smirk widened. "Security will escort you out. This lounge is not a waiting room for imposters." He adjusted his silver badge as if it were armor, glancing at the uniformed guards closing in. His voice grew louder, more theatrical, hoping volume could disguise prejudice. "This area is reserved for verified clients, not for random people wandering in with fake documents." The flight attendant folded her arms and nodded, her scarf shifting with the motion. "She thought she could fool us. It happens all the time," she added, her voice sharp enough for the crowd to hear. The young man in denim took a step forward, his phone steady now, no longer trembling. "I saw her ticket scan green," he said, voice breaking the silence for the first time. "You tore up something that was real." The supervisor turned, glaring. "Put that phone away. You are interfering with official procedure." From the far corner, an older woman raised her voice. "Official procedure? To rip a ticket in half and call someone an animal?" She had been quiet until now, but the insult had burned too deep. Others murmured in agreement, the tide shifting. The woman in white still had not raised her voice. She looked at the guards approaching. Her words were low, steady, unshaken. "Call your security. Bring your threats. But understand this, every second you delay, every word you say, is being logged." The supervisor scoffed. "Logged by who? Your imagination." She reached into her bag, withdrew her phone, and pressed one button. Her tone carried authority that needed no volume. "Activate protocol," she said into the receiver. "Full escalation." And death. A pause. Then a crisp voice answered from the other end. "Confirmed. Protocol is live. Incident is being documented and broadcast to compliance." The color drained slightly from the supervisor's face. The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Around the lounge, more phones lifted, more red lights blinked alive. The crowd was no longer passive. They were witnesses. Still, the woman's posture did not change. She did not threaten. She did not plead. She simply stood, the torn boarding pass in one hand, the phone in the other, her voice carrying the calm weight of inevitability. "You just called the wrong woman a fraud." The supervisor tried to laugh, but it cracked. The sound of authority was slipping away, and everyone in that terminal could feel it. The air was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to her. The guards reached the edge of the lounge, their black shoes tapping against the polished tile with each heavy step. Their presence was supposed to end the debate, to close the chapter before it spiraled further. But instead of calm, their arrival brought more tension, as if the air itself braced for collision. The supervisor straightened his shoulders, emboldened by their approach. "Detain her," he ordered, his voice sharp with false confidence. "She is a trespasser, and she is escalating." One of the guards, a tall man with a clean navy uniform and a clipped badge, moved closer. He reached a hand toward the black woman's shoulder. The gesture was firm, practiced, meant to appear procedural. But before contact could be made, her voice cut through the air. "Touch me again," she said slowly, each word measured, deliberate. "And you will answer for it in more than this terminal." The guard froze. He had seen defiance before, but not this kind. Her tone was not the brittle shield of someone panicking. It was the steel calm of someone who already knew the outcome. Murmurs rippled across the lounge. A man near the glass partition whispered, "She does not even look afraid." A woman clutching a carry-on bag said louder, "This feels wrong. They are humiliating her." The younger guard hesitated, glancing at the crowd. "Sir, maybe we should verify." "Do not verify," the supervisor barked. "Do not give her that satisfaction. Remove her now." The younger guard stiffened, but his hesitation had already revealed the cracks. The woman in white lifted the torn boarding pass slightly, holding it between two fingers for everyone to see. "This is what you call fraud?" she asked, her voice calm but cutting. "A ticket you refuse to even check?" Silence followed. Then, from the far side of the lounge, the young man in denim raised his voice. "I saw the scanner flash green. You are lying. Everyone here saw her walk in like any other traveler." The supervisor's jaw tightened. "Phones down," he snapped. "No recordings allowed in restricted areas." But it was too late. Dozens of screens glowed. The story was no longer confined to the terminal. It was already spreading. The black woman pressed the phone in her hand closer to her mouth. "Document the language used," she said to the unseen voice on the other end. "Every insult, every false order, every misuse of authority, make sure it is logged." The voice replied clearly, carrying just enough for the closest witnesses to hear. "Logged and time-stamped. Corporate compliance has been notified." The supervisor tried to laugh again, but the sound was strained, hollow. "You are bluffing," he spat. "This is just theater." The woman's eyes lifted, steady, unblinking. "Theater ends when the truth walks in," she said softly. The guards, once certain, now looked uneasy. The crowd, once silent, now leaned forward. And the supervisor, once in control, began to feel what it meant to stand on ground that was no longer his. The hum of the terminal had shifted. It was no longer the sound of travelers waiting. It was the low rumble of witnesses holding their breath. Every pair of eyes in the lounge fixed on the woman in the white blazer. Still steady, still unmoved. The flight attendant crossed her arms tightly across her chest, as if doubling down would somehow restore authority. "You are disrupting an international departure," she said sharply, her tone designed to echo across the polished floors. "Security has full discretion to remove you." But before the guards could step closer, another voice rose from the corner. It was the older woman with silver hair who had spoken earlier, her tone now louder, cutting across the room like a bell. "This is not security. This is harassment. I heard the words. She was called an animal. You tore her ticket. That is not procedure." Her statement broke the dam. A younger man in a business suit added quickly, "She stood here quietly. She did not raise her voice. You escalated, not her." The supervisor spun toward the crowd, his authority cracking. "This is not your concern. This is official airline policy." A teenager seated by the window raised her phone higher and spoke without hesitation. "Then why are you afraid of us recording it?" The guard who had hesitated earlier shifted again, his eyes uncertain. He looked at the torn boarding pass in the woman's hand, then at the dozens of screens pointed toward him. For the first time, his jaw tightened, not with duty but with doubt. The black woman finally moved. She took a single step forward, her heels echoing against the marble floor like deliberate strikes. She did not raise her voice, but the firmness in her tone carried farther than shouting ever could. "Every insult, every order, every attempt to erase me is now part of your record. You wanted me silent. Instead, you created evidence." Gasps spread through the lounge. The young man in denim whispered into his phone, "She said it. She is not bluffing. This is real." The supervisor clenched his fists, sweat forming at his temple. "Evidence means nothing. You are not verified. You are trespassing." But his words landed weakly. The crowd no longer accepted them as fact. The room itself seemed to tilt toward the woman in white, as though gravity had shifted sides. She lifted her phone again. "Proceed to phase 2, she said calmly. The voice on the line responded at once, sharp and unwavering. "Confirmed. Phase 2 is active. Compliance is now monitoring live. Legal audit has begun." The words sent a visible jolt through the guards. The younger one stepped back slightly, his hand lowering from his belt. The supervisor's smirk faltered. The authority he wore like a uniform was unraveling thread by thread. And in that unraveling silence, the truth was clear. This was no longer just about a torn ticket. This was about a system caught in the act. And for the first time, It was the system itself that looked like the intruder in its own house. The supervisor's face had begun to lose its color. He glanced at the guards as if their presence alone could patch the hole widening beneath him. But the guards no longer looked certain. One shifted his weight from foot to foot. The other kept his eyes locked on the glowing phones raised across the lounge. Authority, once so sharp, had begun to dull in the face of public witness. The flight attendant, unwilling to let control slip entirely, stepped forward. Her voice was colder now, laced with disdain. Enough of this performance. People like you will say anything when you are caught lying. Stop wasting our time. Step outside before we have you arrested. The words hung heavy, but they did not land the way she expected. A ripple of disapproval spread through the onlookers. The young man in denim, still recording, spoke louder than before. She showed her ticket. I saw it. You tore it up. Arrest her? For what? For existing? The crowd shifted again, unease hardening into defiance. A businessman near the espresso counter set down his briefcase and raised his voice. I travel every week. I have never seen anyone treated like this. You are not protecting the airline. You are embarrassing it. The black woman remained perfectly still. She had not raised her voice once, yet the room moved around her as if gravity itself bent toward her silence. Her eyes swept across the crowd, steady, unshaken. Then she turned her gaze back to the supervisor. You tore my boarding pass, she said slowly, her words clear enough for every phone to capture. You called me an imposter. You called me an animal. You threatened me with security. And you did it all in front of witnesses. This is your record now, not mine. Oh. The supervisor tried to interrupt, but she lifted her hand slightly, commanding the air without force. You think you control this space, but what you really control is a list of violations that will follow you further than you can imagine. A hush fell. Even the flight attendant blinked, her bravado faltering under the weight of the words. Then came the sound of a phone notification chiming through the woman's speaker. A voice followed, crisp and deliberate. Escalation noted. Incident file updated. Corporate Ethics Board has been alerted. All biased language has been documented. Proceed as you see fit. The supervisor's mouth opened, but no words formed. The guards exchanged another uneasy glance. Around them, the passengers leaned closer, their screens catching every flicker of fear that began to surface. The black woman lowered her phone but kept her voice steady. You thought silence meant weakness. It does not. It means patience, and patience has limits. The young girl by the window, still holding her phone, whispered to her mother, She is not afraid of them at all. Her mother nodded softly. No, they are afraid of her. And in that moment, the truth felt undeniable. The power in the lounge had shifted. It no longer belonged to uniforms or badges. It belonged to the calm voice that had waited, endured, and now began to reclaim what was hers. The lounge had become a courtroom without walls. Every phone lens was a witness, every whisper a verdict, and every second stretched longer than the last. The supervisor's hands twitched at his sides, but he forced his voice to rise above the murmurs. You are manipulating the crowd, he barked. This is all a stunt. People like you want attention, not justice. The insult cracked through the air. A man in a gray suit near the back shook his head and muttered, That is the second time he said people like you. He does not even hear himself. Another passenger answered louder, We all hear him, and we are not blind. The black woman in the white blazer tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but sharp. Every word you say digs your own grave, she replied, her tone low but carrying. You believe power is volume. I know power is evidence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, She is right. She is documenting everything. The flight attendant, her composure unraveling, reached for the phone in the woman's hand. Enough, she snapped, her voice brittle with desperation. Hand that over. You are not allowed to record here. The woman's hand did not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the attendant, unflinching. This is not your lounge, she said evenly. And it is not your rule to make. You already tore the only proof of my right to be here. That was your mistake. Now every witness carries the truth in their hands. The attendant froze, realizing that more than a dozen phones were pointed in her direction. The weight of being recorded pressed down harder than the uniform on her shoulders. At that exact moment, a new voice entered. Clear, young, but firm. It was the teenager by the window. She stood up, phone lifted high, her words breaking with both fear and conviction. "I heard everything. I heard when you called her an animal. I saw you rip her pass. Do not pretend it did not happen. We all saw it." The room stirred, energy shifting. The supervisor whipped around toward the teenager, his face red with anger. "Sit down," he commanded, pointing sharply. "This does not involve you." But the teenager did not sit. Instead, she stepped closer into the aisle, her voice trembling but unbroken. "It involves all of us, because if you can do this to her, you can do it to anyone." Her words landed harder than any order. Phones caught every syllable, and murmurs turned into open agreement. A man by the coffee bar clapped once, then stopped, as if unsure. But the sound lingered like a spark waiting for flame. The black woman finally lowered her phone, her voice calm yet commanding. "You wanted me to be erased," she said. "Instead, you erased your own credibility." The supervisor's jaw clenched, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. The crowd no longer feared him. The guards no longer rushed to his call. And the woman he tried to silence had become the loudest truth in the room without ever needing to raise her voice. The atmosphere in the lounge was no longer passive. What had started as a confrontation had turned into a trial witnessed by strangers who would not forget what they had seen. The supervisor's voice cracked as he tried once more to seize control. "Security, remove her now," he demanded, his eyes darting nervously at the phones recording his every move. But the guards did not advance. One of them cleared his throat, hesitation plain in his posture. "Sir, the situation is already documented. Maybe we should verify her status before escalating further." His words carried a weight the supervisor did not want to acknowledge. The black woman in the white blazer lifted her phone slightly, her tone as steady as stone. "Proceed to internal escalation," she said into the receiver. On the other end, the crisp voice of her assistant answered without pause. "Confirmed. Internal audit has been triggered. System access checks are underway. Shall I alert corporate leadership?" Her reply was calm, almost quiet, but it echoed across the marble floor. "Yes, alert them, and begin a compliance lock on all personnel involved." The supervisor's face drained of color. "What game are you playing?" he demanded, his voice high and strained. "You cannot order anything. You have no authority here." The crowd shifted again. A businessman near the bar whispered to his colleague, "She sounds like someone who actually can order these things." The colleague nodded. "Look at her. She has not even blinked." The flight attendant tried to recover her footing. "She is bluffing," she announced to the room, her tone brittle. "This is just an act. She is trying to intimidate us." But her words were drowned by the assistant's voice, still audible on the woman's phone. "Protocol escalation complete. All incidents are time-stamped and logged. Live feed is secure." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. The young man in denim lowered his phone for just a second, whispering to the teenager beside him, "This is not a bluff. Something real is happening." The black woman turned her gaze back to the supervisor. Her eyes did not waver. "You believed you could define me by tearing paper and raising your voice, but paper burns. Voices fade. Evidence remains." The supervisor clenched his jaw, trying to project strength, but his words betrayed his fear. "You are just a passenger, nothing more." Her reply was calm, deliberate, unshaken. "You will learn very soon that I am much more than that." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the revelation they could feel approaching. And the woman in white, still anchored to her place, stood not as a passenger begging for entry, but as the storm waiting to break. The tension in the lounge had reached its sharpest point. Phones hovered in every direction, their tiny red lights blinking like silent jurors. The supervisor's voice shook as he tried one more desperate push. "You are wasting everyone's time. Leave before this becomes worse for you." The black woman did not move. Her silence pressed harder than his shouting. Then, with deliberate calm, she raised her phone once more. Her voice was steady, commanding, and absolute. "Initiate verification. Authorization code, Carter 9 Alpha." The assistant's reply came instantly, crisp and undeniable. "Confirmed. Verification in progress. Ownership credentials are live. Your identity is being displayed on internal systems." A ripple moved through the crowd. The businessman at the bar muttered, "Ownership credentials? Did she say ownership?" The teenager filming whispered back, "She is not just a traveler. She owns something." The supervisor's eyes darted nervously to the guards. "Ignore that," he snapped. his voice high and cracking. "She is bluffing. Nobody says codes like that unless they are trying to sound important." But before his words could settle, one of the guards spoke. His voice was cautious, uncertain. "Sir, her name just appeared on my terminal." He lifted the small device clipped to his belt, the screen glowing faintly. "Executive-level clearance. It says, ownership authority." The crowd gasped as if a veil had been lifted. Murmurs rose, spreading like fire through dry grass. "She owns this? Did he just say ownership?" The flight attendant shook her head furiously. "No, that cannot be right. She walked in here dressed like any other passenger. She cannot be—" The woman in white cut her off, her voice quiet but unstoppable. "I am not any other passenger. I am the majority shareholder of this airline, this lounge, these terminals, this system you tried to weaponize against me. They answer to me." The words fell like thunder in a silent canyon. The crowd erupted in whispers, some gasping openly, others recording closer. The young man in denim whispered to his phone, "She owns the airline. She is not bluffing. She owns the airline." The supervisor's mouth opened, then closed, no sound escaping. His authority, once wrapped around him like a cloak, had disintegrated in front of every witness. The black woman lowered her phone, her gaze sweeping across the room. "You told me to wait outside," she said softly. "But I do not wait. I lead." Gasps turned to applause from the back of the lounge. The young teenager's voice rang out, trembling with awe. "I knew it. I knew she was not afraid. She was waiting for this moment." Oh. And in that moment, the revelation was complete. The balance of power had flipped. The woman they tried to erase had just revealed herself as the one person none of them could afford to challenge. The revelation cracked through the lounge like lightning. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the departure announcement seemed to falter, as if the airport itself paused to listen. The supervisor's face drained to a shade of gray. He glanced wildly at the guard's terminal, searching for a glitch, a malfunction, anything that would undo what he had just heard. But the truth glowed stubbornly on the screen. Ownership authority, Carter. Passengers who had stayed quiet until now began to murmur openly. "She owns this airline?" one man whispered in disbelief. A woman in a red coat said louder, "They tried to throw out their own owner. This is going online right now." Phones lifted higher, capturing not only the woman in white but also the supervisor's unraveling composure. The flight attendant's scarf seemed suddenly too tight around her throat. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. This must be a mistake. We could not have known." The black woman turned her gaze toward her, eyes steady as glass. "You knew enough to call me an animal. You knew enough to rip my ticket without hesitation. What you did not know is that silence does not mean weakness." The older woman with silver hair stepped closer, her voice carrying for all to hear. "I saw it. I heard every word. You all treated her like she was invisible. Now she is the one person you cannot erase." Applause broke out, scattered but sharp, from passengers who had held back their outrage. The sound echoed across the polished floor like a verdict. The supervisor raised his hands, desperate to regain footing. "Everyone, calm down. This is all a misunderstanding. Protocols are complicated. Mistakes happen." But his words rang hollow. The young man in denim shouted back, "Mistakes do not sound like calling someone an animal. Mistakes do not rip real tickets into pieces. You did not make a mistake. You made a choice." The black woman's phone chimed again, the assistant's voice crisp and clear. "Corporate board is online. All feeds are synchronized. They await your decision." The supervisor froze. The attendants froze. Even the guards stood still, suddenly realizing they were no longer enforcing orders, they were witnessing judgment. The woman in white did not raise her hand or her voice. She simply took one calm step forward, the echo of her heel cutting through the noise. "This moment is no longer about me," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "It is about how you chose to treat another human being because of what you assumed. And now, everyone is watching." Gasps spread again, phones zooming closer, recording every syllable. The tension had turned into a stage, and the entire room leaned toward her as though waiting for a verdict that could not be delayed. And standing at the center, steady and unshaken, she made it clear. The trial was already over. The guilty had already convicted themselves. The silence that followed was the kind that pressed against every wall, heavy and absolute. The supervisor's throat worked as if he were trying to form words, but nothing emerged. His badge no longer looked like a symbol of authority. It looked like a weight dragging him deeper into the consequences he had created. The black woman did not hurry. She lifted her phone again, her voice calm and measured. Execute termination of all personnel involved. Effective immediately. Lock their system access. Suspend their credentials. Log every detail for legal audit. Her assistant's reply came like a gavel striking wood. Confirmed. Credentials frozen. Access revoked. Termination notices sent. The system has been updated live. The effect was instant. The supervisor's badge blinked red, a small light pulsing against his chest like a public confession. The flight attendant looked down at her terminal, her fingers tapping desperately against the screen, but every attempt met the same message. Access denied. Gasps swept the lounge. Passengers leaned forward, some cheering under their breath, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The young man in denim whispered into his phone. She just fired them. Right here. Right now. The older woman with silver hair placed her hand against her chest, her voice trembling with both awe and anger. That is justice, she said softly. The supervisor stumbled a step back, his face pale. You cannot do this, he stammered, his voice cracking. You cannot just end people's careers in the middle of an airport. The woman in white met his gaze, her voice a steady blade. You ended your own career the moment you decided that prejudice was policy. I did not take your power. You surrendered it when you tore that ticket and spat those words. The flight attendant's hands shook as she clutched the edge of the counter. Please, she whispered, her confidence gone. I did not mean. The woman's eyes did not soften. You meant every word when you said them. What you did not mean was to be caught. Applause broke out again, this time louder, rising from passengers who could no longer contain their outrage and their admiration. Phones captured every second, recording not just a confrontation but a reckoning. The guards stepped aside quietly, their posture no longer that of enforcers but of bystanders. They did not reach for her. They did not move to block her. They simply allowed the moment to unfold. And at the center, the black woman in the white blazer stood steady, her calm more powerful than any outburst could have been. This lounge belongs to me, she said, her voice low but resonant. This airline belongs to me, and justice belongs to everyone who has been told they do not belong. The room erupted not in chaos, but in thunderous applause that rolled through the terminal like a wave that could not be stopped. The applause swelled, rolling across the lounge until it drowned out the overhead announcements and the hum of departing flights. Travelers stood taller, some clapping with both hands raised, others simply nodding, their faces lit by the glow of the screens that had captured history in real time. The supervisor no longer stood like a man in charge. His shoulders sagged, his badge still pulsing red against his chest, a silent symbol that his authority had been erased. The flight attendant's scarf was crooked now, her trembling hands unable to adjust it. Both of them looked not at their former target but at the phones, the dozens of eyes, the witnesses who had already judged them. The black woman in the white blazer turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room. She was not hurried. She was not flustered. Every step she took was deliberate, echoing against the polished marble like the rhythm of a verdict delivered. The torn boarding pass remained between her fingers, no longer a wound, but a banner. She paused in the center of the lounge and spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest wall. You told me to wait outside. You tried to strip away my dignity. You called me less than human, and you believed no one would care. A hush fell. The phones leaned closer. Even the guards stood straighter, as if bracing themselves for the weight of what came next. But dignity, she continued, is not something you grant or take away. It is carried. It is lived. And today, every insult you hurled has become proof of who you are, not of who I am. Gasps filled the silence, some followed by shouts of agreement. The teenager by the window raised her phone high and called out, "Say it louder! They need to hear this everywhere!" The woman in white lifted the torn boarding pass for all to see. This paper meant nothing once you decided I did not belong, but it is not the paper that proves my place. It is the fact that this airline, this system, this very room already belongs to me. Her final words struck like iron. I do not wait outside. I do not beg for entry. I do not ask for recognition. I lead. And from this day forward, you will remember that leadership does not whisper, it stands. The lounge erupted. Applause thundered. Passengers rose from their seats. Voices joined in cheers. The supervisor lowered his head, unable to meet the eyes of those who had once been silent witnesses. The flight attendant covered her face, hiding from the judgment she could not escape. The woman in the white blazer walked calmly toward the exit, her stride unbroken, her presence undeniable. She did not need to shout, she did not need to demand. The entire room had already spoken for her. And as the cameras kept rolling, one truth echoed louder than the applause. Justice had not been delayed, not hidden, not postponed. It had arrived in silence, stood in patience, and spoken with unshakable power.